Welcome to yet another edition of Captains of Industry on CNBC Africa. For today's episode, we're in the heart of Tanzania, one of the fastest growing economies, but also arguably one of the most fragmented. Now, one entrepreneur, or a serial entrepreneur, as we'll soon find out, is slowly changing this tide, one sector at a time within his conglomerate. Nadeem Juma, chairman of AIM Group, Quito and Dar es Salaam International Academy, motivator extraordinaire, Forbes 35 under 35, and a lot more within that under his belt. Thank you very much for creating time to speak to us. Now, before we even get into the fundamentals of this, you consider yourself an old guy. 35, started your own academy, we'll talk about it later. Why an old guy? I mean, maybe because you missed Forbes 30 under 30? Is that?
First of all, thanks for having me, George. I consider myself an old guy, I think purely because I think I've done a lot. And I see that now I can't do as much as I used to when I started when I was 19 years old. So that's why sometimes I feel like an old guy.
All right, let's go into a context of this before we get into yourself. Tanzania, one of the hardest markets in the East African region to penetrate. But also we have a lot of institutions happening here. We have the fastest growing institutions, the fastest growing governance, but all of them don't come together. But this is from someone, an outside perspective looking in. For those of you in here, how does it feel?
So I think, first of all, there is a perception that Tanzania is a very hard market to penetrate, and there may be a lack of collaboration. When you're within Tanzania, I think things are very, very different. So there are massive opportunities. There's a lot happening. There's extreme collaboration, especially under this new government of ours, and I think even our previous government. And I would say that Tanzania is purely a hard market because of its size and its population. But other than that, I think it has the most opportunities.
We actually had an interview just about that correlates to this regarding commercial and M-Pesa, and we came to find out that Tanzania actually has more revenue, but Kenya makes a lot more news about it. Now, as you speak to us about how diverse your portfolio is, just speak to us about notable trends that you've noted shift as you get into entrepreneurship.
So first of all, I think this mobile money story that everybody talks about, you will probably through your research know that mobile money started in Tanzania, not in Kenya. It actually started with us through a previous company. And there is a lot going on in the mobile money space here. We have 3 strong operators. I think one of the things that Tanzania is not as good at is its own PR. And Kenya is excellent at its PR, and you see this, and I think they expose themselves much better. But there is massive trends happening here. So one is in the technology space. If you look at our incubators, if you look at the kind of homegrown technology being developed in Tanzania, be it in the agri sector, be it in the financial services, fintech, be it in energy, so things like solar energy, wind energy. There's a lot going on here, probably just not advertised as well. And I think it's very dynamic and growing.
How diverse is our portfolio? We came here anticipating 3 things, Quito, AIM Group, and Dar es Salaam International Academy, but we've seen even the people taking behind the scenes, those are actually products innovated here. How diverse are we?
So AIM Group is pretty diverse. As an individual, we have 2 what we call our core businesses. So Dar es Salaam International Academy, which is an international school that started 14 years ago, and AIM Group. AIM Group has 2 business units within it. So one is a marketing agency with a digital focus. The second business unit is our R&D and products and service development unit. Within that, we have a number of products. So Quito, for example, is a product that came out of our R&D team that has been spun off and is an independent company. KYC is another example of that product. We have a tech fund as well. So overall, we probably have 7 to 8 independent companies that fall under, but they all come from within AIM Group or DI.
Right. We'd like to get into the numbers as we try to understand this particular market as well. Now, revenue collection on the same. Without giving us particular numbers about what we are streaming in generally for this month before a lot of people get into your books as well, just give us a sense of, in comparison, when you started about 19 till now, you've had probably about 14 years to experiment on this. The turn in revenues and the patterns that you've noted that entrepreneurs can bag on?
So we're in 2 industries that are growing very, very quickly. Education, is one, and then tech and advertising. So we're blessed in that sense. On average, we've been growing between 17 and 22% year on year since we started. And I think that will probably continue for the next 5 to 6 years. But we come from a base of zero. So you can imagine when you're growing at that rate, it sounds good, but when you're coming from nothing, you have to grow at that rate to be able to sustain yourself. I think there is opportunity in the education and tech fields as well as advertising to continue growing at that rate. There needs to be more competition, so there's a lot of room in the market right now for more players to come in who can have sustainable growth at that level.
All right, we're seeing a shift in the sectors. Technology has been highlighted as one of the fastest growing, but for people who've invested there, are the returns do the returns correlate to the attention given?
So it depends on how you invest in technology. There has been a buzz for the last 5 years around East Africa and technology. You call Kenya the Silicon Savannah, but the way those investments are made are by VCs who are looking for their 20, 30x in 5 years. That's not sustainable. If you're looking to make a long-term investment, so build actual products and services that add value, certainly the returns are there and they're sustainable.
Right. Let's give a comparison in terms of brands. Now, when most people talk about international brands, particularly in the technology sector, we hear Uber, we hear Yahoo, Google, Visa, all this, but we never hear a group from East Africa or from Africa that has penetrated into other markets with such scalability. Now, we anticipate that some of the brands you're building, you hope to reach them on that scale, but what do you think we're not addressing in that sense?
So first of all, you've mentioned all American brands. And I think by nature, because of the scale and what's happening, obviously, and the media attention and their growth, you're going to hear about those brands. In the same way, you hear about M-Pesa and Safaricom. I think these are big brands. If you focus in on Africa, if you focus in on the region, you will hear about local brands that are doing very, very well. I'll give you examples of Celcom, Kopo in Kenya. These are examples of locally built brands that are scaling, that are growing, and are known within the region. We are very, very focused. So our goal is to tackle the East Africa region. We understand, and I think a lot of people don't understand that come into Africa, that Africa is a continent, it's not a country. So we think we have massive opportunities in terms of population, in terms of growth, in terms of similarities in East Africa, and we will be focusing on East Africa. And from there, through the right alliances and the right partnerships, we may go beyond. But our goal is to tackle East Africa.
Well, now, being a serial entrepreneur, of course, you're under pressure to ensure that your business continues to take stage on after stage on. But how much pressure are you under to continue reinvesting your capital but still expanding? The operational costs for you must be something you always try to work around.
So we've been blessed by our board. We invest almost all our returns, and we've done that for the last 10 years, and we will probably continue to do that for the next 5 to 6 years. And the reality is, when you can demonstrate growth, when you can demonstrate that the equity, the value of your business is going in, you can keep your shareholders happy. And the only way to keep as a chairman, my role is to keep my shareholders happy, but also I know that I can't do that if I don't continue investing into the business. And we have to show that to them. We need them to understand that value. And as long as the value of the company goes up, I think that they will allow us to continue investing into our business.
All right, the scope within which we've been discussing this, there are numerous businesses doing it, of course, different scalability, different management, but we all see they tend to approach the same sponsors, the same international bodies for finance. So how do you work out that conversation, commercialization, scalability, and still consumer awareness?
So first of all, I think getting capital. So we have gone about it in a very different way. We've raised all our capital in the local market or self-funded. For the first time ever, we are now trying to raise in the international market as we spin off 2 of our products, Quito and KYC. And I have to say it's very, very difficult purely because of the amount of time that it takes. So it does take 90% of your time trying to raise this capital instead of running your business. And that we don't think is very sustainable. So capital is available in the local market. You just have to be willing to find it. To me, that's much more sustainable. Capacity. I'm a big believer of the East African community and SADC. I think that you need to have flow of goods, services, as well as human capital. Without that flow, there will be massive capacity issues. I don't need to tell you about education levels in Tanzania versus Kenya or Rwanda. So you do need to have free movement of people. I think that's necessary to sustain the growth that we're having. In terms of scalability of your businesses, like I said, if you look at the population of East Africa, if you look at the GDP of East Africa and the growth, the opportunities are growing. 7% a year. This year they're saying Tanzania 5.5%. Still not bad compared to the rest of the world.
All right. Financing within the local market, IPO in the looks?
I would say not in the short term for us. Not in the short term for us, purely because I'm going to pull the Uber card here. It's not right for us because we won't be able to innovate at the same level. When you go public, the accountability is slightly differently. We probably won't be able to invest at the same level that we are at the moment as well, take the same risk. So long term, potentially, but not in the short term. So I'd say after 5 years.
Right, and now the government structures seem to be in place even as we wind up the first part of this. We're still seeing the private sector trying to come in and help budding businesses, but what loopholes are not being addressed at this point?
I think that's very difficult to address because we're going through a change in Tanzania. So as you know, we have a new president. There's a lot of loopholes being filled. I'm sure there's new loopholes being created. We're going through a transition. I think one of the things that we need to understand, so things like corruption, taxation, these are normal things that business people face. I think what we need to focus on in East Africa is how we support startups and entrepreneurs. So hitting them with the heavy taxes that they still get as big companies is a massive issue. In Tanzania, for example, we have over 30% payroll tax. How is that sustainable for a startup? It makes no sense for them to even start up.
All right, let's put a pause on it there. We'll continue in just a few minutes. And now, while we were 19, or while I was 19, I was thinking about which school to go to, but our serial entrepreneur in today's show was actually starting a school. So when we come back, we talk to the man himself, understand what exactly drives him and what plans he has both personally and for the conglomerate, right after the break. Welcome back to Captains of Industry with me, George Ndurango, here on CNBC Africa. Now, before we left for the break, we tried to understand what businesses here in Tanzania are doing to go against the tide. We are seeing a fragmented environment, but businesses such as Nadeem Juma, who's the chairman of AIM Group, Quito and Dar es Salaam International Academy, are doing exactly that. Let's continue with that conversation. The man himself and some of the highlights within the businesses that he's noted as we continue to see Tanzania's progress. Now, before we left, even as we go back to you opening a school at 19, Quito and KYC are two particular businesses that I'm interested in, and you'll touch on the rest. But Quito, commercialization on that end, I mean, even trying to get the artists and industries to understand that a platform can actually be used commercialization and still consumer awareness. I mean, give us the rationale behind the notable trend that started this off. Well over, at least the years have gone by now, you can understand how the business works, but the notable trends within that.
So Quito, I think, is a great story. We started just over 2 years ago. And it was interesting the way it started. Through our agency business, someone had a music platform at that time called East Africa Tunes, and they were pitching it to one of our clients to come in as an advertiser. And the client asked us to sit in as their digital agency, said, can you come and see what's going on here? They want us to advertise on this music platform. And as they're pitching, we realized there's a great concept here, but the way he's trying to commercialize it will never work. So we asked them to stop the pitch. We went to the client, we're like, can we stop this pitch? We want to invest in this company. And they're like, of course. And we made an offer right there. We're like, we'd like to invest in your company. And I think within 48 hours, we had a deal done. We rebranded the product in Quito. We rebuilt the technology from scratch at our R&D team. And our goal really was, and I think the founder had this goal, and that's what inspired us, was distribution of music in Tanzania was a massive, massive issue. It's an issue across Africa. But you had physical distribution that was run by cartels, I would say. they were duplicating and bootlegging their own copies, so artists were making no money. So we're like, okay, digital's the new way. Let's kind of do delivery. And everybody thinks about smartphones. We're actually delivering content to feature phones, to low-end internet-based phones, as well as smartphones. The growth has been tremendous. We reached our 5-year goals in the first year. So we have over 800,000 unique subscribers. That means I know the profile of every one of my subscribers. We do between 300 and 500,000 downloads a month. Quito has become the go-to place for artists to release their music. The likes of Ali Kiba, Vanessa Mdee, Diamond, when they want to do a new release, they come to Quito. And the industry has built us. So we have not advertised ourselves. It's been artists' goodwill that has allowed Quito to get where it is. They promote it. They talk well about it. They make sure the music is there. We don't put money behind advertising. We put money behind supporting artists now because we see what they're doing for us.
Crucial is the revenue generated from Quito, particularly for the industry player, the artist, knowing very well that they have sold out shows almost every other time.
So artists, like anywhere else, still make most of their money through shows. We're trying to disrupt that. We're trying to change that. So revenue is important, but you have to get scale in order to see that revenue. So our model is 60% of the revenue that we get goes to the artists. 10% will go to our distribution partners. So if it's a blog, if it's a website where we've put a widget, they'll get 10%. 30% stays with us. We try and reinvest as much of that as possible, but the scale still isn't there. You need to have hundreds of thousands of continuous downloads before the revenue from that will actually impact an artist, and then we have a long ways to go. So right now I think it is reach and access to their music, which is much more important, and then the revenue is secondary.
All right, now it's a working ecosystem, the numbers are growing, but what's the end game for Quito?
So the reality is, so we're launching our app towards the end of this year, so we're going to get into streaming. We're learning. The reality is there's over 100 music platforms on the continent. We all know that there's going to be consolidation. We'd like to be the East African player when that consolidation happens, and at that point we're realistic. We will probably partner or be acquired by a major player. But we want to be acquired or partner on our terms, and that's why we're building the platform, we're building the catalog, we're getting the user base, because it needs to be contextual. And we think in the next 3 to 5 years that will happen.
Right, apart from Quito, now we have another huge brand, KYC. Now it's the only one in the country where 3 telcos are actually working together with the vendors. Break this down for us.
So EKYC is basically, KYC means know your customer. So it's a way that we register customers and activate their SIM cards. In 2014, 2015, when Westgate terrorist attacks happened in Kenya, was that 2014, I believe, there was a crackdown on the telco in Kenya where the regulator wanted to identify the individual's mobile numbers. And they couldn't do that because of the way SIM cards were being sold. And what we saw was a ripple effect across the continent. Suddenly, every regulator is cracking down on telcos and saying, well, you're just selling your SIM cards, you're not registering the individual. We saw this as an opportunity. And again, from the agency business, Vodacom was one of our clients. So we went to them and said, well, we have the tech capabilities to develop a technology, to develop an app to allow you to register your customers. And they're like, that's great, but the reality is there's multiple stakeholders. There's 2 other operators that are big, Tigo and Airtel, and there's the regulator. You figure out how you're going to bring all that together. We went to the regulator. We received the first letter of no objection for KYC, so we presented our technology. They said, go ahead. We got all the CEOs in a room. We presented our technology. We did a pilot. 2.5 years down the road, they're all using our technology, and it's moved way beyond. So we are now looking at quality of data. We're looking at what are the over-the-top solutions you can provide to that, like mobile marketing. We're working with NIDA because you have our national ID penetration that's very, very low. How can they leverage our technology to increase penetration, validating information against theirs? It's the first time, and I think this for us is something we're very, very proud of. You've got the 3 big telcos working together, and the regulator with a local vendor.
Still on the same, there's this Finance Act that requires all telcos to list on the BOWS. It was supposed to happen by December, but probably will push the deadline because we haven't seen it happen also across the region. But possibility for better news if this actually happens?
So I think it's positive. I think it needs to be well planned. So I do agree with you that December is too short. The reality is we're going through a change. We need to make sure there's liquidity in the market. It needs to be well planned. But certainly for local investors, I think this is going to be great. I think it's going to be great for telcos, and it's necessary.
All right. Let's go into you as a person as we get into the close of this interview. 19, starting a school. What molded you getting into serial entrepreneurship at such a tender age? Now here, I'm more than willing to hear you talk about the numbers you started with, because at that particular point, having something of such scale is much more than most budding entrepreneurs start with.
For us, I think the serial entrepreneur is something that comes now, 14 years later when you're writing your profile. When you start off in business, you don't think you're a serial entrepreneur. I think by nature, I had this ability to like business and understand business, but the reason I started was when I went to school here, and I went to the international school, and it was very, very difficult for my parents to send me to that school because it was very expensive, and they weren't well off at all. So I came back, and I realized, I was actually in university, so I was coming back for holidays a lot, and everybody's talking about this emerging middle class in Tanzania. I'm like, okay, if there's this emerging middle class, where are their kids going to school? And you realize they're going to Kenya, to South Africa, and we're like, okay, if that is what's happening, you're never going to get them to stay. So someone needs to start a school that's affordable, has international standards, and is local. And we came up with the idea of a school. I got, I believe it was just under $1,000 from my dad at that point. And I'm like, okay, I need that to start the school. And then you have to hustle. You have to understand how to do things. And you learn and go. I used to knock on banks' doors every day to try and get loans. And that's when I learned about how you get a loan. The first bank ever to give me a loan here was Barclays Bank. And they trusted us with a small amount, and we took that, and then we worked with other banks, and that's how we started the school.
But did you have knowledge on where you wanted to be, or business knowledge on the same?
On education? Right. No, I had no business knowledge on education, but I think when you're an entrepreneur, those are things that come to you. And also what you realize, so there's a big difference between an entrepreneur and a CEO. So you'll notice that I am not CEO of any of our businesses. I'm chairman. So I'm very, very good at startup. I can get them off the ground, but I'm horrible at managing a business. I'm sure all our staff would quit and run away if I was the one running the business. You need to surround yourself with experts. You need to surround yourself with people who complement you and complement your weaknesses. So in our business here, I've got two partners, Hafiz and Paul. Hafiz, who's my brother. In our school, my sister's executive director. And this was all by nature, so it wasn't planned. It just happened because their skill set complemented. We've surrounded ourselves with more people whose skill set complements. For example, our CTO here, he started with me when we built the first mobile banking platform. He went away to the States to get his master's, and then he came back to join AIM Group. And I think you just need to find those people who trust you but also complement what you're doing.
Now, within the journey, I should ask this, within the journey, how long do you take before you know that this business has taken shape, now it's on for me to try on something else?
So I spend time at all the businesses, so I'm very focused on big picture. They call me the king salesman, so I'm part of business development. I see clients a lot. But you realize very quickly as you're growing, so I don't think it's a period in time. I think it's a realization of getting your first client. So here, when we got our first client, we saw by nature, you have to have contracts, you have to be issuing your POs and your PIs, and systems automatically come into place, and that's when you're like, okay, now I need to get a professional in to run this. And I think that is something entrepreneurs often don't realize their weaknesses. And if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, you need to recognize your weakness.
Right. You've mentioned one of your weaknesses as described by your role, but what about from at least a broader perspective, you managing this entire conglomerate, what has been the biggest barrier you've had to overcome ever since?
So I think one of the things is learning about finance. For me personally, that's been a massive challenge, and I've had to work at it. Entrepreneurs by nature are always going, and they're probably not as analytical when it comes to their financials and their balance sheets, and you realize that acquiring more customers always isn't good for the business. And I think for me, that's something that I consciously have to work at, and I need good people around me to help me with that. I think another very personal barrier is when I started, I was very arrogant, and I realized that that was a big mistake. That came through learning. So my first business failed, and I learned that arrogance doesn't get you anywhere. So always be willing to listen, to learn. Everybody is probably smarter than you and hustling as much as you. And I think the third kind of personal thing is mentorship. So always have someone around you that you can trust and talk to who has much more experience. And we always hear about mentors. To me, I think that's very, very important.
Thank you for creating time to speak to us. And Nadeem Juma, Chairman of AIM Group, Quito and Dar es Salaam International Academy. Thank you for watching Captains of Industry. Keep it CNBC Africa, first in business worldwide.